My name is Keith Gilges, and I have the honor of serving as the new Chargé d'Affaires ad interim at the U.S. Embassy in Belize. As my kind of fancy title says, albeit in French, I'm in charge of the affairs of the embassy temporarily while we wait the nomination and confirmation of a new U.S. ambassador. There's no word on that score yet, but we hope to hear something before too long. To all of you, my Belizean hosts, thank you for the warm and generous welcome. For any of you who regularly follow our Facebook page, you may have seen some photos of my travels so far. I've dined on rice and beans in the Belmopan market, dived the reef near San Pedro, and danced in Dangriga at a Garifuna gala. I'm also told that I'm the first Chargé d'Affaires, at least in recent memory, to play mass during Carnival in Belize City. I've had fun, but with a serious purpose. During each engagement, I've done a lot of listening. Each conversation has given me important insights into the various opportunities and challenges that face communities throughout Belize. As Chargé, it's my job to strive to understand the complex nature of issues here. And we will continue to support your efforts to improve citizen security, foster good governance, and promote economic prosperity. About next April's referendum, it is your responsibility as citizens to understand the impact of the choice you will be making based on facts, not fear. And then vote for what you believe will best secure Belize's future. The decision is yours. Choose wisely. To my fellow Americans, whether you are living in Belize or a frequent visitor, you are my citizen envoys. Your daily interactions with Belizeans shape their perceptions of all Americans. So please tread lightly on the environment, respect local laws, and savor every minute you're here. I look forward to continuing my travels and engaging with the diverse peoples, communities, and cultures that exist in this remarkable jewel of a country. So if you see me out and about, please come on over and say hi. I want to hear your stories. I want to know about your experiences. But thanks for listening to me, and I look forward to hearing from you.
And welcome back. Of course, that was his personal introduction, but we now introduce to you, as we have on set, the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires, Kieth Gilges, with us. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Marlene. Kevin, thank you very much for having me on.
It's a great opportunity to be able to talk a bit with you about your work that you plan to undertake in Belize and just those first impressions. But let's just start off by learning more about Kieth,
Sure.
a bit about your background. You were telling us that you were kind of a late developer in getting into the diplomatic field.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I started this as a second career. When I first graduated from college, I moved to Washington, D.C., and the first 6 years or so, I worked for an environmental nonprofit in Washington doing government relations. So that's how I first learned my way around the city of Washington and about government. And then I left that job and I moved to Hong Kong, where my parents were living at the time, and did my master's actually in environmental management. And toward the end of that, I was able to get a job at the Consulate General, the U.S. Consulate General there, as a local hire. So I did that for a few years, and getting to meet the diplomats that came through, getting to understand the work they did, I thought to myself, that's what I'd really like to do. And so we went through the whole process of taking the exam, and then there's an oral exam you have to take, and then you're put on an eligibility list, and you go through that whole process before I was actually able to formally join the State Department in 2001.
Tell us some of the other countries that you have worked in.
So prior to being here, so after Hong Kong, I then went to Mozambique, then Brazil. I was back in Washington for 2 tours in 2 different offices there. Then went back out to Kenya, and then Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I first grew to truly love the Caribbean. And then after that, back in Washington for 2 tours, working on Canadian affairs, and then for a year at the White House. And then I came down here just back in July.
Okay. And now that answers the question as to how you participated in Carnival right after you got here.
Absolutely. Well, I first learned about Carnival to a real degree in Brazil.
Yeah.
I first experienced Carnival as a participant in Trinidad. And when I was chatting with some staff at the embassy with Carnival coming up, and I said to them, well, I want to play Carnival. And they were a little surprised at first, and I said, I'm not kidding, I really want to play Carnival. And I just had a fantastic time. It was a great opportunity to get through some neighborhoods in Belize City, to be able to meet some folks, and to do something that was Belizean.
Yeah. So tell us your first impression when you were informed that you would be placed in Belize as Chargé d'Affaires. What were your first thoughts?
Well, to be clear, when I got the position, it is to be Deputy Chief of Mission.
Okay.
So I am supposed to be the number 2 person at the embassy, and we are awaiting the nomination and confirmation of an ambassador. Now, as I said in the video, I don't have any news on that yet, but we're hoping to hear something before too long. But in the absence of an ambassador, then the number 2 person steps up. You never take the title acting ambassador. You're either the ambassador or you're not, and I am not. But you take the title then Chargé d'Affaires. And so, as I said in the video, I'm in charge of the affairs for a little while. But when I'll tell you that the first thing that happened after I let my family, my sister and brother and father back in Washington, back in the States, know that I would be going to Belize this year, my sister immediately went online and booked the Christmas holiday. So there, long before I knew where I would be living or knew that much about Belize, she went ahead and booked the holiday. So they're all coming down here at Christmas to spend Christmas here. So,
And on a personal level, knowing, doing your background, learning the background of Belize, the different issues that we face, some of our priority areas, what excited you the most about coming and contributing?
Well, I certainly from my time in Trinidad and Tobago, I fell in love with the Caribbean.
Yeah.
This is an amazing area. But having lived in the Caribbean, it's so easy for folks who haven't been or who just come for vacation to only see one side of it. And I've had the good fortune, both in Trinidad and now here, to actually live in the Caribbean. And that really makes a difference to realize, yes, there are some great things about it, but there are things you don't see if you just come down for a week or 2 on vacation. And so I was thrilled when I knew I'd have the opportunity to live here, because there's a depth of understanding you get when you get to live in a place, when you get to make friendships that aren't for a week, but that are for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting.
As you come down, I was joking with you off here that you've done a lot of activities that Prince Harry, I think, did in our country. But one of the things you spoke about in your video was understanding the concerns, basically, of the Belizean people and some of the issues that we're going through. And I see you've jumped in head first to connect with the community in a way that is real. What has been your experience so far with some of the issues that we've been facing? Both positively, some of the opportunities, and some of the challenges so far.
Sure. One of the things that I'm trying to do is make sure that I understand what's going on here to the best of my ability so that I can explain that to Washington. And so that's the opportunities that I have when I'm out and about and I'm talking to real folks and I'm getting out of my office and getting out of Belmopan and getting into the communities so that I can understand those things better. I did quite a bit of research before I came down here. And Belize is an amazing place, and it has a growing tourism industry, and that's fantastic. There's an increasing number of Americans who are coming both to visit Belize and then also to live here as retirees. So there's this real affinity between the U.S. and Belize that's great to work with, that's great to see, and great to experience. But there are challenges here as well, and what we're looking to do is identify where we can help improve areas that are a challenge. Ultimately, any solutions that are developed to the challenges that Belize face are going to be Belizean. They're going to be led by Belizean. The innovations are going to come here, but there are opportunities where we can help. And I look at some of the challenging issues. There is, an issue of the transshipment of drugs through Belize, and that activity has a corrosive impact upon the institutions of Belize, upon civil society, and that's an area where, listen, we've been having drug issues in the States for a long time. And when you're trying to combat the scourge of drugs, you need to know that it's got to be a multifaceted approach. You need to deal with the production of it, the distribution, the consumption, all those areas. And so where we're able to help with something like that here is to help combat the networks. We've got networks around the world that are trying to combat this. So where can we target our assistance to help Belize? And there have been some terrific successes lately. There were two planes that were taken down, one in September, one in November, close to a metric ton. that was taken off the market, that was burned. And so that's one of those examples where if we're able to help build the capacity of law enforcement to do those things, that's where we want to help. Ultimately, the solution is going to be Belizean, but where we can strategically have some influence, where we can have some activity, where we have some experience and we can share that, that's my goal to do while I'm here.
Now we know that the U.S. has contributed significantly to narco trafficking and also looking at security issues on a whole.
Contributed to efforts to combat narco trafficking.
Yeah, to combat,
okay.
yes. And working with defense forces and training personnel. But from your experience since you've been in country and your own background research, where are some of the potential areas where you feel that there can be a stronger relationship built between the U.S. and Belize to help to ramp up these efforts?
Yeah. Well, I'm not coming here thinking that I suddenly am going to do a whole bunch of things different from my predecessors. Listen, my predecessor, Adrian Galanek, and the previous ambassadors, Moreno, Thermopylae, they all did a fantastic job, and things don't necessarily suddenly change on what our efforts are. Ultimately, where I think we can have an impact is helping with the international networks. So the folks that are trafficking, whether it's in drugs, whether it's trafficking in people, they're smart, they're networked, they're sophisticated, and they're learning. If we as the community of nations, as we as partner countries want to effectively combat them, we need to be increasingly smart, increasingly networked, increasingly sophisticated. We need to bring that same level of commitment to combating what they're doing. We need to create new innovative ideas of how we're going to do that, whether that's improving our maritime and domain awareness. That's a fancy way of saying, do we see what planes are coming in? Do we see what boats are passing through the waters? And our ability to enhance that, if there's some technology we can bring, that's what we want to try and say. It's like, here's the area where we can help. And that's one of the goals that I have while I'm here.
One of the primary drugs in Belize is cannabis. And we know that very recently there's been a conversation amongst parliamentarians about the legalization of marijuana. And one of the things the Prime Minister has pointed out is the potential implications for trade and the relationship with the United States. What are your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana in a country like Belize?
Well, we are currently going through a similar discussion in the United States. Our system is set up where we've got 50 states that are, in some ways, centers of innovation, where things are tried out. And so there are certain states that have legalized marijuana. So there is an issue where we're dealing with the public policy implications of that. What does it mean across state lines? Now Canada has moved to, I believe, has now officially legalized marijuana. So what happens when you cross the border? For us at the federal level, marijuana is still illegal. Yeah. And so that hasn't changed. So as Belize moves forward with this discussion, certainly I think it can learn from other countries at the implications that it's had. We're happy to work with the Belizean authorities, but for us, this continues to be an illegal substance.
A Schedule 1, is that the proper term? It's a Schedule 1 drug?
I think so, but we're getting to a degree of specificity that I don't have at my fingertips.
Belize is going through a transitional time. It's a time when our very identity as a people is directly on the front burner, particularly as it relates to our relationship with our neighbor. We're about to, as you know, face a referendum next year to make a pivotal decision. You referred to it in your address. But there's nobody sitting here in the U.S. top seat, and there's been no one here for a little while in that top seat. Have we been forgotten?
Not at all. Not at all. Listen, any new administration that comes in, it takes a while to fill all the positions. Now, it's no surprise to anybody that there are still a number of positions at the State Department, within the administration that have not yet been filled, and that includes the ambassadorship here. Belize absolutely has not been forgotten. This is traditionally a political appointee. So there are people like me who are career foreign service, and about 2/3 of ambassadorships globally go to career people, and about 1/3 go to political appointees. And what's useful about having a political appointee ambassador is they have a direct connection back to the White House and back to the president. And so that's a really powerful connection. And so it's important. And so, like I said, I am probably more eager than anybody to welcome a new ambassador here, because that helps improve our links back to Washington.
Yeah.
Are there any other jurisdictions that have this length of a layover between appointment of a new ambassador?
Well, listen, we don't have an ambassador right now in Mexico. And that's a pretty significant relationship for us as well.
Okay.
You know,
That makes you feel better?
that makes me feel a little bit better.
We've just nominated,
Sorry
the
for
president
them.
has just nominated ambassador to Australia. You know, there's also not, so there are a number of positions. Honduras does not currently have an ambassador. There's somebody that's been nominated, and we're waiting for the confirmation process to go through.
Okay.
But Belize is not alone in this position by any stretch. But in the meantime, I hope I'm able to fill in sufficiently.
Yeah. Well, you know, Kevin introduced the issue, and I think it is important that we have some time to talk about it. You've arrived in Belize in a time where there is a very intense conversation taking place. One some have deemed emotional, some have claimed there's misinformation. There's a whole lot of conversations taking place. And that is because come April 2019, Belizeans will be asked to make perhaps the most important decision in our history. I want to hear your perspectives on what you've been seeing. We know the United States is assisting in financing the education campaign. But talk to us about what you've seen, what you've heard, and your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. This is a seminal moment in Belizean history. And as such, that makes it that much more incumbent upon everybody to really understand the implications and the issues at stake and what they are voting for or what they are voting against. And that's really key. And so our role in this is to try and say, you know, as a partner with Belize, to get the message out, to urge people to be educated about it. One of the challenges with an issue like this is it can become very visceral. You can feel something and you start, well, this is what I feel. And then you stop hearing the message about what it's really about. And so, you know, in my message, I said this again, it's really important to understand the facts, to know what's at stake here, and then make your choice. And ultimately, I'm not voting. It's not up to me. It's up to Belizeans. And so we are supporting an education campaign.
Yeah.
But people need to think, you know, intellectually, let me understand what's happening. Let me make sure that I'm making what I believe is the best choice for Belize going forward, and not do it just based on a sense of fear or a sense of feeling. You know, there needs to be a greater understanding of what's going on.
No, it's important, you know, and I think while yes, you definitely will not be participating in the vote, you do represent the United States, which is considered one of the financiers, which is a friend of Belize, and also one of the financiers for some of the other activities, like the maintenance of the Adjacency Zone that we currently have between Belize and Guatemala. Part of what we have been hearing from our own representatives is that there has been international pressure. In other words, other countries saying, listen, we cannot continue to finance a peace zone, an adjacency zone. You need to resolve this issue. And the natural cynicism that people have is that perhaps this is more of an external pressure rather than an honest attempt of a resolution. How do you respond to that?
It's been a process, you know, to get to the point in 2008 where there was help from the international community to bring sides together to lay out a process to say, wouldn't it be beneficial to both countries to have this issue resolved? Wouldn't that allow increased opportunity for a secure border, for a protection of the environment, to ensure that there isn't illegal logging or gold panning or those sorts of things going on? So the international community said, okay, we'll step forward and help Belize develop a process. And then in support of that process, they'll provide funding. And so I don't believe at this point, I don't think the US has any funding directly for the adjacency zone. I think a lot of that's coming from the EU and possibly the UK, I believe. But again, that is in support of a process that leads toward some sort of resolution. So I don't know what it means. Is there external pressure? No, there's external cooperation. There's external partnership to say, we're helping, but this is your decision. And ultimately, if this process, I don't know if there's a no vote in April 2019. I don't know what that means, going forward. I do know what the process going forward would entail. But the one last thought I'd have, and I do hear a lot of arguments one way or the other. I'm continuing to listen. I'm continuing to get out there. I want to hear what folks have to say because I want to better understand that. Again, that's part of my job, so I can explain to Washington what are the feelings, what are people thinking. But ultimately, I would just repeat that we're here to cooperate. We're here to work with, to try and make sure that folks make the best decision for Belize.
Now, the U.S. has been a friend of Belize. They have voted in favor of us to get our independence. But America is also a friend of Guatemala. And so one of the issues in terms of moving forward, if there is a yes vote or if there's a no vote, if there's a yes vote and Belize wins everything intact, we're going to be relying on our friends and partners who have influence within the Security Council, if we get to that point, or just in terms of keeping the peace in this area. The U.S. has to tip the line. In terms of thinking about the practical way, you're referring to the gut feeling, which is the way that we do operate. But there are certain rational things in terms of looking at the situation of a simple thing of interest and investments. The interest and investments in Belize for the U.S. as compared to the issue of investments and interest in Guatemala. How does the U.S. balance that dynamic between being friends of both countries? It's not in their interest to jump into that fight. America is a bit 2 hours up north. How do you balance that to sort of say we are friends of both in this situation?
And we are, and we have different interests in each country. When I look at the investments we make, in Belize, in our partnership, in fact, per capita, we have more in our international narcotics and law enforcement program. We are investing more in Belize than any other country in the hemisphere per capita. So there's no doubt about our commitment to Belize. Yes, we are friends with both countries. Is it in our interest for both countries to get along well? Do we want our friends to be friends with our friends? Absolutely. And so, one of the things we've also helped build over the past 10 years, and that's a unique role that we've been able to play, is through our military, through the U.S. Southern Command, to say let's bring together the Chief of the Defense Staff of Belize, let's bring together the Chief of the Defense Staff to make sure that there are those open lines of communication, that those relationships develop, that these folks know each other, that we can make sure, we can help Belize and Guatemala make sure that before something escalates to a point that it gets out of control, there are ways to diffuse that so that there is the space for a political solution. So there's a space for there to be this type of referendum. And that's an investment we've made. That's something that we've been able to do. And I'm very proud of that work. But again, it's an area where we have helped. But it's really the Belizeans and Guatemalans agreeing to come together and saying, okay, let's make sure we have the capacity, we have the lines of communication to diffuse that kind of tension before it gets out of hand.
Now, I want to move the conversation forward just in the interest of time. You were in the middle of Central America at a very interesting time. President Trump's rhetoric and the conversation that has been taking place about the migrant population and the migrant caravan has been very intense. What is it like for you to be placed in this area where you have the on-the-ground feel of what's happening, not just in Belize, in Mexico, in Guatemala, and you hear what is taking place, the conversation in Washington and throughout the rest of the U.S.?
Yeah, well, and certainly I came directly from that conversation in Washington coming down here. I was at the White House as director for North America, so I was dealing with our bilateral relations with Mexico and Canada for the prior year. This is an intense issue. This region is getting a tremendous amount of attention right now
Not
because of
necessarily
these
positive.
challenges. it's a tension, and we are working to both deal with our right as a country to control our borders, and every country has a sovereign right. I would think Belize is certainly one of those countries that appreciates the importance of having the sovereign right to protect who comes in and out of your borders. So we're going through the same thing. At the same time, as I talked about combating drugs, dealing with these sorts of issues like migration needs to be multifaceted. And our programs, while there may be a lot of attention about what's happening at the border between the US and Mexico, we are also working with the governments of Honduras, the governments of Guatemala, the governments of El Salvador on the drivers of migration, on the things that are causing those folks to want to leave those countries and head north. Because listen, that's not an easy journey, and it's not necessarily a safe journey. And those people can be taken advantage of. They can be victimized in the course of that. So the idea is, how can we bring all the tools to bear to help deal with these situations? One of the criticisms that I've heard oftentimes in every country that I've served in is, we're not getting very much attention. The US isn't paying attention to where we are right now. And I always think to myself, look at the size of the US Embassy in Belize versus any other one. I think that shows our commitment, to be here and to provide attention. Sometimes the spotlight's on tough issues, but listen, friends are honest with each other, and they have these tough conversations. Friends don't always agree about everything, and there are going to be instances where on policy, the government of Belize and the government of the United States might disagree, but we're not going to let the disagreements define our relationship.
I'm sure you've realized that Belizeans, by our exposure to U.S. media, we're very in tune with what is taking place in the United States. And as the campaign unfolded for the last election, there was quite a bit of talk about migration, the conversation about building that wall, and what seemed to be a very popular issue of almost boxing out the potential for people to come into the United States. And that's a different version of the United States that many Belizeans have been exposed to in kind of the urban areas that they've populated, whether it's Chicago, New York, LA, or Miami. As the US representative here, when you encounter this new perception of America, what do you say to them?
Well, America is a very diverse place. And part of what any democratic system allows is for new voices, different voices to be heard. What we saw in the election in 2016 was a shift. My job is to represent the administration and the government that the American people choose to put in place. This is the fourth administration that I've officially represented, and I am proud to have had the opportunity to represent each one. As our policies shift, it is my job to represent those policies, and so that's what I will do here. I will do my best to explain, but oftentimes what I'm able to do with some distance, and to have some space, is to say, okay, let's not just talk about how the media sometimes ramps up an issue or how there might be focus on conflict. Let's talk about what is the issue at stake here, and how can we try and come up with solutions to the issues outside necessarily the glare of a certain spotlight. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do here. With the issues of the caravans and the migrants, that's not something that's specifically hitting Belize, but it's certainly an issue in the region.
But it's a generalized perception of the region, which Belize then becomes a part of. Can I ask, one of the concerns we hear from people so often is, it's so hard to get a U.S. visa now. And when there is not information, we create we fill that void on our own. So we hear a conversation taking place of anti-migration and whatnot in the U.S. media, and then people aren't getting visas here, and they build that connection. Has there been a change in the foreign policy? No,
there is no change in the process by which we adjudicate visas for Belizeans traveling to the United States. There is no change in that. The Immigration and Naturalization Act, the law that underpins how those decisions are made, is unchanged. The rate at which Belizeans get visas to go to the U.S. is unchanged. So none of that is any different. The vast majority of people who apply for visas to travel to the United States for tourism or business are approved. At this point, we don't release official numbers. We tend to hear from the folks who maybe at that point in their lives didn't qualify. They're a little bit more vocal, and I understand, but we encourage legitimate trade and travel to the US. Does everyone who wants to apply for a visa under our rules necessarily qualify? No. But they will all get a fair hearing in front of a U.S. Foreign Service officer adjudicator. And if at that point they don't qualify, they are welcome to reapply at some point in the future. The integrity of our system is incredibly important. So, both ethically in the rules and physically, I am not able, even though I'm the acting chief of mission, to walk into the consular section. I don't have the code to the door. I have to knock on the door. Somebody comes to the door and lets me in, and it's like, okay, boss, what are you doing here? It's like, oh, well, I need to speak to the consular chief about an issue, and so then I can go in. The whole idea is to ensure that knowing me or knowing somebody isn't what's going to get you a visa. I can't help on those issues. And sometimes people come to me and it's like, hey, great, listen, I'm going to be applying for a visa. I'm like, well, great, good luck. But that system is going to be determined at the window with the information that consular officer has to make sure that it is fair across the board.
I wish some government departments in Belize work that way, but it doesn't. There's one official who said that there are three important things in politics. There's money, and then there's money. Belize has been having issues with our international banking, or the risking of our banking institutions. Part of the problems that we're having in terms of migration is economic opportunities. And so surely there is a common interest to see that the country takes its responsibility to create economic opportunity for its people. But international banking is important for that because we depend a lot on foreign investment. Where do you see us being able to improve our situation as it relates to the financial and banking problems that we're having?
Specific to that, yes, the U.S. does sometimes put rules in place over how you can access our financial system to make sure that drug traffickers, that people that traffic in persons, folks that are embezzling money, those sorts of things, that they don't have access to our system. To have an effective system in place, that improves the financial well-being of everybody. There can at times be costs to doing that, and particularly in a small market like Belize. Yes, it can be challenging to try and meet the regulations that are required to ensure that you're in compliance with those rules. Listen, we have folks from the U.S. Treasury Department, the Office of Technical Assistance, that are coming down, that are working with the central bank, that are providing that training. And folks here, listen, they're smart. When the trainers come in, they're like, these folks, they're smart. There just aren't that many of them. The challenge for Belize is often, it's an economy of scale. Your central bank doesn't have thousands of people that work there. It's handfuls of people that work there. But again, we're committed to providing where we can that technical assistance so that the banking system here can be more secure. There are a couple of different issues that came in there, and bank de-risking. Some of that is international banks. Do they see the return on their investment? And our policy can't be, Bank X, you need to go and open up a branch in Belize. That's not how the free market works. But we can help provide Belize with the technical assistance to improve their regime such that it becomes a more attractive place both for banking and then for the follow-on impact of having that sort of financing available here.
Your predecessor had an eventful experience with the religious community, and we're talking about policy of the U.S. government, where there was an issue in relation to the LGBTI community
and raising the
raising
rainbow
a flag. Can the religious community in Belize see? It's almost, I cannot expect what the answer should be, but is there any difference in terms of this administration's policy in relation to the operations here and how that person is going to be appointed in relation to that incident that happened? Because it was an actual protest.
Yeah, there was, but I believe that was
small.
I believe that was the first year.
Yeah.
I don't believe in subsequent years that there was any protest. Listen, the rights for LGBT people, those are human rights, and that is something that we continue to support. So we certainly have engagement and outreach to the religious community. I don't necessarily like to say it's one community versus the other. You know, I understand there are some deeply held religious beliefs, and I respect those. I also respect the right for people to express who they feel they are. We in the United States, have in past years put up the rainbow flag. I certainly anticipate doing that next June during our Pride celebrations. But I also welcome other views. If people want to come and say, hey, listen, I've got some issues with this, I welcome hearing that. I want to hear from all sides. But our stance that rights and protections for LGBT people are human rights, and that hasn't changed.
So, since being on the ground in June and meeting with different stakeholders, getting your feel of the country, what would you say is one of the more complex issues that you have encountered in addressing?
Yeah. Well, you actually just had a segment on gender-based violence on here, and that's something that we're also participating in and working on. The 16 days. We're working with Marie Sharp and Marie Sharp's sauces on an anti-gender-based violence campaign. So that's a really tricky issue because that's the intersection of domestic life and public policy. Yeah. And that's a really tough interface to try and find what's going on. But it's an incredibly important one that needs to continue to be given voice to people. Folks need to know that there are resources out there. So I think for people that are victims of it, it's often unclear where can they go, who can they speak to, do they want to speak out? And so the more voice that shows like this do, that companies, as part of their corporate social responsibility campaigns, the more things that they're able to do, the more people realize, hey, I'm not alone, and there is somewhere I can go, and there's somebody that I can talk to, and no, this isn't normal. And too often, I believe, in that sort of situation, people come to accept a warped normality. And the answer is no. Violence is violence. And it's not normal, and it's not right.
You have almost a trifecta of a duty. You here relate back to the U.S. central government. You deal with the Americans who are here, and you deal with Belizeans who have issues going out or the like. Are there in any of those areas? Is there anything new on the horizon that we can expect in terms of improving for any of those sectors of your constituents, if I could put it that way?
In some ways, the issue with foreign policy is usually one of continuity. Things don't suddenly change. Our relationship with Belize doesn't suddenly change because there's a new occupant in the White House. Friendships are built over a long period of time. Yeah. Based on shared values, based on continuing dialogue, honesty, and respect for differences. So what I am doing is looking at what did my predecessors do, and they did fantastic work. So where can we continue those efforts? And we focus on three main areas, and it's citizen security, it's economic development, economic prosperity, and good governance. And from time to time we shift. And right now, some of our funding streams are saying, listen, we want to focus on good governance for a little while. So we've got these acronyms, our CARSI ESF grants, but it's basically the Central American Regional Security Initiative Economic Support Fund. Right now, we're focusing on working with civil society and government to improve governance. And so that's a focus right now. That can change then next year and say, okay, we've done some programs on that. They'll last for 2 or 3 years. Now let's shift focus back to economic development. Let's focus back to citizen security.
Yeah. Now, we understand that it's not one individual, whether the ambassador or chargé, who is responsible for setting the agenda, but each representative does have just a little preference in whatever interest there is they have. You have a bit of an environmental background.
I do.
Do you foresee perhaps finding ways of merging relationships? How will Keith have his interests served? Not personal interests, but just the things that you have an affinity for.
Sure.
In your time in Belize.
You know, I've had opportunities to travel through quite a bit of Belize in my 3.5. I guess I'm coming up close to 4 months here, and I've gone all the way up, you know, to the Mexican border, Corozal Orange Walk. I've gone down as far as Punta Gorda, you know, east and west from Benque to Belize City. But in each of those trips, I'm on paved roads. And so the environmentalist in me says, okay, it's time to start getting off the paved roads. Sometimes it's tough in the big car that I drive around in, so I might need to get a slightly smaller car on some of the roads. But the idea is there is so much more to Belize that exists outside of the municipal centers, that's in the small villages, that's in the rainforest. And so what I'm looking forward to in sort of my next set of visits is to get off the beaten track, is to go to places that haven't been before. Both because that gives me a better understanding of the complexity of Belize. You know, I always say to somebody who goes to the United States, if they visit New York, yes, you're getting a piece of the U.S. experience, but is that the whole U.S. experience? You know, it's pretty different if you then go visit Nebraska, you know, or the Pacific Northwest, or Florida. You know, these are different places, whether you're urban or rural. I want to make sure I'm doing the same thing, that it's easy for me to spend time in my office here in Belmopan. But as you can see from the pictures, I'm trying to get out and about as much as possible. And part of that's going to be out to the more remote areas.
You didn't mention the Keys, though. I don't know if it.
Yes,
you said
did.
as far as Belize.
I have so far. I've been out to 2 keys.
Yeah.
Been around St. George's Key on a boat. Went diving off San Pedro. And my Christmas holiday, my whole family's coming, and we'll actually be on one of the keys for Christmas.
Nice.
Oh.
For 4 or 5 days doing diving, and then the whole family's going into one of the jungle lodges for.
And when your family touches down, you will tell them they absolutely must try to eat
hudud.
Yeah, you're a local favorite already.
I got to tell you, I had I went to the Griffin Settlement Day in Dangriga, and you know, there are a bunch of things going on. Get there early in the morning, was able to see the canoes come in, and then I attended the mass, and then we were at the Alejo Beni Park for the speeches and for the celebration. By the end of that, I got to tell you, I was starving. And the woman that took me around, Karima, she said, hey, listen, I've arranged something for you. And so we left the park, and right next to was her grandmother Grace's house. And we were able to go in, and she had made hudud. Wow. And you know, I had something I had to get back to in Belmopan that day. And so we weren't able to eat it there, but I was able to get home-cooked, fresh out of the kitchen. That's out of Grace's kitchen, some hudud. And you know, sometimes the roads are a little bumpy, and I'm in a suit, so I was a little careful about eating, but I was able to eat about half of it in the car, and then as soon as I got home, put the rest on a plate,
and I was
just
going to ask you if you
up.
ate it the traditional way, which is without a spoon, but I guess you had to use a spoon to save your suit.
Yeah. and it was in a large cup, so to try and deep down in, but it was delicious.
So if you went for Garifuna Settlement Day celebrations, that means you have learned how to punta.
Maybe.
Did you attempt to dance the punta?
You know, there was certainly some dancing as we were going down the street. There was certainly some dancing as we were coming out of the church. I will not claim that my dancing ability is such that I will say that I managed to do the punta. I think I managed to bob around a little bit, but that's about the best I could offer.
You know, you have diplomatically gotten yourself out of the pop quiz of a live punta. So
excellent. Well, I'm grateful. Thank you.
All right. Well, we are out of time, and we appreciate you coming in so early into your time here in Belize, and we really hope that you will come back with us and share more as the continued relationship.
Absolutely. I hope this is a conversation, and something we want to continue. So thank you very much for having me on.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we will be back in a few, so stay tuned.